Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which will be an introduction to asset management in general and the asset management training that we'll be holding in Vermont coming up starting in August. We'll talk a little bit today about what the training will entail. We'll talk some about Vermont and the different programs that Vermont has available related to asset management. And then we'll talk more specifically about what the training will cover. My name is Heather Himmelberger, and I'm the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And I just wanted to take a moment and go over some logistics of the webinar before we get started. At the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a taskbar, a control panel, and that's a place where you can submit questions. You can look at different features of the webinar, and you'll see at the bottom there's a chat box. So if you have any questions as we go along, please type them into the chat box. You can type them in at any point. We'll take them at the end, but go ahead and type your questions in as we go along. And at the very end of the webinar, we'll cover any questions that are submitted. You will be in listen-only mode through the whole webinar, so the only way you'll be able to ask questions is actually through the chat box. If you have any issues during the webinar as well, if there's any audio issues or anything like that, please go ahead and write those in the chat box as well. With that, we'll get started. I'll turn it over to Jim and Allison from Vermont, who will talk about some of Vermont's programs and the different things that are going on.
Thanks, Heather. And my name is Jim Soriano. I manage the Drinking Water Capacity Development Program for the state's Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm here with Allison Murphy, the other half of our team.
Good morning. This is us, the Drinking Water Capacity team.
Our program's goal is to help drinking water utilities become more sustainable by improving their technical, managerial, and financial capabilities. Although our program focuses on drinking water, many of the concepts apply to wastewater and stormwater utilities too.
We know the services that Vermont's water utilities provide are vital to the health, safety, and economies of our communities. We rely on them for disease protection, fire protection, basic sanitation, economic development, and to support our quality of life. We appreciate the work that you all do.
And we know that many of you face significant challenges trying to keep Vermont's waters clean and provide customers with safe drinking water. These challenges include complying with new and more stringent regulations, including things such as the revised total coliform rule, the upcoming lead and copper requirements stemming from the Flint, Michigan tragedy, and on the wastewater side, the new TMDLs. Other challenges include retaining the knowledge of staff about to retire, recruiting and keeping qualified staff, and addressing emerging contaminants such as blue-green algae, pharmaceuticals, personal care products, and PFOA.
But the greatest challenges for many utilities are those related to managing and replacing aging infrastructure. Feeling pressure to keep rates low, many communities have not been making the investments needed to properly maintain, repair, rehabilitate, and replace their assets. So now many of these assets, our sources, pipes, pump stations, storage tanks, and treatment plants, have either exceeded their useful lives or will exceed their useful life soon.
Regardless of the challenges your utility faces, an asset management program can help. An asset management program can help you become more proactive and plan for the future. And that's why for the second year we are offering this asset management workshop series. We are very excited to have Ms. Heather Himmelberger coming back to lead the workshops. Heather is a registered professional engineer that has been working with water and wastewater utilities for more than 20 years. As she mentioned, she is the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and she serves on the American Water Works Association's Asset Management and Water Loss Control Committees. For more than 10 years, Heather has been conducting trainings and providing direct assistance to help utilities throughout the country and the U.S. territories develop asset management programs. We're excited to have Heather leading the workshops because her approach works well for utilities of all sizes and is a good fit for Vermont.
Before we turn the webinar over to Heather, Just want to touch on the asset management grants that we offered. Following last year's workshops, we offered grants of up to $20,000 to help drinking water utilities develop and implement an asset management program. So far, we've executed grant agreements with 22 municipalities for a total of about $420,000. Municipalities are using the funds to create or improve maps and asset inventories, conduct risk assessments to identify priority assets, and to develop ways to reduce the risks and costs of running their drinking water utilities while meeting their customers' expectations. We plan to offer a second round of grants at the end of this year's workshop series. Utilities that participate in the workshops will receive priority points for the next round of grants. Now we'll turn it over to Heather. Heather is going to provide a brief overview of asset management in the workshops. We should have plenty of time at the end for questions and comments.
Thank you, Allison and Jim. And we will get started now to talk kind of more generally about what asset management is and then go into some more specifics about what we're actually going to do in Vermont with the training. So as was mentioned, if you operate and or manage a water system, or it could be a wastewater system or a stormwater system, it really doesn't matter. You have a lot of competing priorities. There's a lot of things on your plate. You have regulations, you have to do maintenance, you have to react to problems that arise when assets fail, set rates, you have to worry about your source water, your budgeting, your planning, capital improvements planning. There's a lot of stuff on your plate. And then somebody says to you, oh, now there's asset management. Do I really want to do this? What's in it for me? Do I have time to do this? It can really feel like maybe somebody's just imposing one more requirement on you. This is something that on top of everything else I have to do. And it can also feel kind of overwhelming that it's just so many assets and so much to do that it might just feel like, how can I take this on when I have all these other things I have to do? But it really doesn't need to be like that. It doesn't need to be like that at all, because asset management can really be used to help you solve your problems. So it's not something from the outside, it's something from within. You can implement it at any level of sophistication, so it doesn't really matter what technologies are available to you. You can do it with any technologies, and you can do it without much technology at all, because it's not about what your computer does, it's about how you think about your assets. You can do a lot of it yourself, but the really nice thing in Vermont is the pieces that you need a little bit of outside assistance for, there will be funding available through the state. So it's a really excellent opportunity in Vermont for you to take it on and do as much as you can yourselves, and the pieces that maybe you need some outside assistance or you need some extra resources to complete, you will have that opportunity by working with the state of Vermont to get the funding. And it doesn't have to cost a lot. Again, there is funding available for the pieces you need, and it can really provide benefits to you. And the more you do, the more benefits you can get out of it. You can use asset management to address the specific issues that your system is facing. And the reason there's a blank slate up there is because it's really wide open to what the problems are that you're facing, what issues, concerns, etc. you have. You can structure your asset management program to help you address the problems that you're having. So stay tuned. We're going to come back to this issue a little bit later on in the webinar, and we're going to talk more specifically about some examples of how asset management was used to handle and address some specific issues the systems in our last round of training had. So what exactly is asset management? There are 5 core components of asset management, and the first is the current state of the assets, basically what is it that you own. The second is the level of service, so what do you want your assets to do. The third one is criticality, so which assets are the most important to sustained performance of your assets. The fourth one is life cycle costing, and this is where we get into operation and maintenance, repair, replacement, rehabilitation. And the fifth one, the one that kind of catches a lot of us, is funding. How are we going to fund our programs? Where's the money going to come from? What resources do we need? So let's take a few moments and just talk through each of these various components so you have a little better idea of what's involved in asset management thinking. So the first part is taking an inventory of the assets you own. So what are the things that make up your whole system? So you're going to have a variety of wells and pumps and tanks and maybe some surface water intake structures or reservoirs, pipe, all kinds of things that make up your system. So it's an inventory of all of those things that are part of your system. The next step is, where are they? So where are these assets located? And we usually split them into two. We have horizontal assets and vertical assets. What we call horizontal assets are usually our field assets. So these are our pipes, our hydrants, our tanks, our valves. And we want those on some kind of map. Now you see a fairly sophisticated GIS map over on the left. There are a lot of other techniques to make maps, so it doesn't have to be quite that fancy, and especially the smaller you are, you might be able to use some other technologies. But you just want to have a good idea of where your assets are located. And then the other assets that we call vertical are those things that are in pump stations or in buildings, treatment buildings, that sort of thing. And we want to know what building those assets are located in. Next, we want to know what condition the assets are in. So are they in great condition? They've been maintained well? They haven't had a lot of problems? Are they in very poor condition? Are they showing a lot of wear? Are they showing some damage? Have you had a lot of repairs and issues with them? Or have you not been able to do maintenance so that maybe the condition is a little bit worse? So we're going to give them a rating. Generally speaking, we do something like a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 rating to show what the condition of one asset is to another. Next, we want to look at what is the remaining useful life of the asset. So an asset is going to wear out over time, and at some point it's going to reach a level like that blue dashed line there, where it's no longer going to do what you want it to do. So if it's a valve, that level would be the valve doesn't open or doesn't close, because that's what you want a valve to do. If it's a fire hydrant, maybe it's the case where the fire hydrant isn't flowing enough water or it's started to leak. If it's a pipe, maybe it's a certain number of breaks per mile that would be the minimum acceptable level. When it hits that level, you're going to have to do something, rehabilitate it, replace it, somehow take care of that asset. So what we want to know is how much time is there between where we are today and when we reach that level where it's no longer going to do what we want, and we call that the useful life remaining. So that gives us some idea of how much longer we can count on the assets that we have. Then we want to know what the asset replacement value is. So for example, if we were going to replace meters and we wanted to have radio read meters, what would be the replacement cost for those radio read meters versus the meters that we had? Or what's the replacement cost of a well or a pump or a tank? Pipe, etc. And this gives us some ability to say how much money will we need in the future when we reach the end of the useful life of our assets. Next, we have the level of service. This is where we get into what do we want the assets to actually do. This is a step that a lot of people really don't like and feel like it can be missed, but this is a really key portion of asset management, because this is where we start to think about what are we trying to provide for our customers. We have to remember that first and foremost, utilities are customer service businesses. We may think we're in the business of managing assets, but we're really in the business of providing a customer service. We manage assets in order to better provide that service, but it's really all about the customers, all about the service. We want to put customers and customer service basically at the forefront of all we do. In asset management terms, we call this the level of service, or sometimes you'll hear us say LOS, but it just means what are the things that you're going to do to meet the customer needs and desires. So it's going to define the major goals of the utility, what you're going to provide your customers. Next, we have criticality. And in criticality, we're trying to separate which assets are more important to us in order to keep the facility running and functioning and meeting our customer service than others. And it's true in every collection of assets that certain assets are going to be more important to you than other assets. So how we define this in the water and wastewater world is we look at two features. What is the likelihood that any individual asset will fail? So what is the likelihood that the fire hydrant will not flow water, or the valve will not turn, or the pipe will break, or the tank will leak? You know, what's the likelihood that any of those particular events will happen? And what's the consequence if they do? So will it happen, and if it does, is it a bad thing? We can visualize risk by putting probability of failure on one axis and consequence of failure on the other. So if you look at assets that would be in the upper right quadrant, those would be very high risk assets. These would be assets that would be likely to fail, and if they failed, it would be really bad for the utility. Assets that are in the lower risk box are unlikely to fail, and if they do, it really doesn't matter. So the reason we look at this type of thing is we want to spend our money, our resources, our time in the high risk box, because that will make our operation better. That will give more service to our customers, give more reliability. So it helps us focus where we're going to spend our money and give us literally the opportunity to have more bang for our buck. So when they talk about doing more with less, this is one way that you can actually do less better. The fourth thing is the life cycle costing component, and this is again where we get into how are we going to operate and maintain our assets, and then when they reach a point of failure, what are we going to do? Are we going to repair them, replace them, or rehabilitate them? So life cycle is really about balancing, and we balance the O&M repair and rehabilitation side against replacement, because generally speaking, operation and maintenance activities are a lot less expensive than replacement activities. So when you're looking at a pipe infrastructure issue, replacement is often the most expensive option, so if we have other options, we would like to take those before we go into replacement. Maintenance can consist of routine, preventative, and predictive. So routine maintenance is when we go out and do our daily activities. Maybe we have to clean something out, maybe we have to check a sensor, maybe we have to lubricate something. Those things that just keep the assets running on a day-to-day basis, nothing out of the ordinary. It's just those routine things that we have to do to keep our system up and running. Then we have preventative maintenance. This is when we start to view a problem occurring in the system and we take an action to prevent that problem from getting worse. So for example, if you had a pump station building, you might notice a hole developing in the roof, and you don't want that roof to collapse, or you don't want damage to occur inside the well house, so you will actually go and take action to prevent the hole from getting bigger. So anything you do to prevent a failure falls in the preventative maintenance category. And finally, we have predictive, where we try to use technologies to help predict when something might happen in the future. So this would include something like sending a diver into a storage tank, or sending a robot into the inside of your storage tank to try to predict, you know, when that liner of your storage tank might need to be replaced, or when it might fail, or sending a camera through a sewer pipe if you're on the wastewater side. Something that you're doing to try to predict when the asset is going to fail. On the capital side, if we have an asset failure, we have three choices. We can repair the failure and leave the asset largely in place. We can rehabilitate it, and this would be like a tank that you put a liner in. So the tank hasn't been replaced, but you've done some activities to rehabilitate that tank so that you can continue to use it for quite a while. And then finally, there's replacement. And we always have to think about, you know, why would we want to choose one of these over another? And that's part of the asset management thinking, is trying to decide which of those approaches is best for any given asset. And then finally, we have our long-term funding. How are we going to pay for what needs to be done in our system? We have two different kinds of funding needs. We have our day-to-day expenses that cover operation and maintenance and just your normal routine activities that you do. And then you have your capital expenditures. These are your long-term expenses to replace pipes, tanks, pumps, wells, reservoirs, etc. And the reason we look at them separately is because the operation and maintenance activities will be funded exclusively out of community fees. They may be taxes, they may be user charges, they may be other kinds of fees, they may be penalties, impact charges, all that sort of thing will fall under community funding. And then if you're doing a replacement project, capital expenditure project, you have choices. You can use some community funding, but there's also outside funding, like Vermont's State Revolving Loan Fund program is one option, but there are several other state and federal programs that you can go to get funding for your capital projects. What it really comes down to is it's all about the story and how we tell it. And this is story in a good way. How do we tell people what we're trying to do with the money? How do we let them know what the money will be used for? What's the risk if we don't spend the money? What's the benefit if we do? How do we tell a better story to our customers, to our decision makers, so that they understand the need for a rate increase or additional fees coming in to cover infrastructure replacement? That was kind of the whirlwind tour of asset management, and certainly we'll cover all of these topics in much greater detail at the training. But I wanted to take a moment to just show you some ideas of how asset management can be used to solve specific issues that your system might be having. So this is kind of taking the asset management thinking that we just described and applying it to a specific issue that your system might be having. So the examples I'm going to use are from systems that were in the training the last round in Vermont. And these systems were given the opportunity to look completely at their system, look holistically at what they did, and then try to pick something that they found to be a major issue within their system. And they could define that however they wanted. It was either something that took a lot of time or cost a lot of money, or was a major concern that maybe they'll lose reliability or the ability to serve their customers or something. So we let everybody sort of look at their system and choose the item that they felt would be, if they could solve it, would really help them. And again, there's different ways that you can choose that. So let's get into some specific examples. So one utility had valves that were a major issue. And it turns out that their valves turned, some of them turned one direction and some of them turned the other direction. So you can imagine the problems that might occur if somebody goes out to do a repair, they're in a hurry, they want to turn off the water, and you think it turns one way, and so you're trying to push really hard on the valve to get it to turn, but it really turns the other way, so you end up breaking the valve, or you don't get it open because you're not sure which direction it's turning. That can cause some major problems. So this utility worked on that as a problem that it would really help if they could solve. So they collected data on which valves turned which way. They did color coding of the valve can lids to be able to quickly see which valves turned which direction, so that if a crew went out there, they could figure out which way to turn it. And I think they also painted inside the valve can lid as well, like inside the piece that stays in the road, so that they, if the lids got swapped, they would still have some color. They found and mapped all their valves so that they would have good locations. They cleaned the valve cans that had dirt or debris or whatever in it. They replaced the broken valves, and then they developed a budget that would help them with future replacement of valves. So now they have a lot better inventory. They know where their valves are located. They know which way they turn. So a future emergency repair will be a lot easier for this system to handle because they have so much more information about their valves, and they learned a lot about their system through the process. Another example is a storage tank. This particular utility had a storage tank that was installed in 1906, and I will say that is not a picture of their storage tank. Just to be clear, that is not a 1906 storage tank. And they were trying to decide if they should replace the storage tank or do something else, and at the time, this was a few years back, they really didn't have adequate funding for the replacement, so they lined it. Now they're several years into that, and what they wanted to do was do another analysis to see would relining the tank one more time to buy them maybe another 10 or 15 years be a good idea, or should they go ahead now and replace the tank? So they did an analysis to see, well, what would it cost them to reline one more time? Was it something that worked well for them? Is it something they felt like they could go forward with in the future? And they did determine that relining one more time would really actually be the most beneficial option for them. And the other issue they looked at is they have piping, 1906 piping, that leading to and from the tank. And they felt that that was a high risk, again going back to the criticality. To keep this tank running, they were very concerned that if this piping failed, then even if the tank is okay, they might not be able to get water in and out of the tank. So that's something that they're looking at addressing, is the piping itself rather than the tank. But it's a really good example of how a rehabilitation approach is going to allow them to use this tank for, you know, considerably longer than most tanks are in service. So they'll get, you know, well over 100 years, probably closer to 130, 140 years out of a tank. So they've got a really good return on their initial 1906 investment. Another example is meters. This particular utility really didn't know for sure where all its meters were located, whether every single customer was metered, whether all the meters worked. So in the process of doing their inventory and looking at their system and really digging into the meter issue, they were able to find some illegal connections that they could address. They found cases where 2 houses had 1 meter and they had to fix that particular issue. They found some stop meters. They were able to replace meters that were not functioning properly. They mapped all their meter. And their plan for the future is to do some accuracy testing. So the first step is to really find out where they all are. But then the next step is to kind of figure out, well, are they reading accurately? And is the utility losing some revenue because maybe the meters aren't as accurate as they should be? And typically meters read on the low side, so they're more in favor of the customer than the utility. So going forward, they may have the chance to gain some revenue into their system if they find out their meters are inaccurate and they replace them. Another utility looked at fire hydrants. They had the need to kind of go out and inventory where all their fire hydrants were located because they didn't have a really good map and inventory of what was out there, where they were. They found some hydrants that were completely hidden from view. They were inside bushes or trees, and many of them were purposely planted by the customer to hide the hydrants. They didn't want them in their front yard, so they planted trees or bushes or whatever to cover them. And from a customer perspective, just aesthetics, you can see why they would do it. From a utility perspective, it's very dangerous because if a fire occurs, you know, will they be able to actually find the fire hydrant to hook up to it and put out the fire? So it was a really big issue for the utility to go out and find the hydrants, locate all of them, address these issues where the fire hydrants were hidden from view, and also kind of examine how each of the fire hydrants were working. And they were looking at particular ages and types of hydrants and how they were performing, and they were able to identify one particular type and age that was performing poorly and focus their replacement program on just those poorly performing hydrants. So rather than having to replace all of the system's hydrants, they're only going to have to replace a select few, and they'll have a much better performing system. Similarly, a different utility looked at hydrants, but for kind of a different reason. They wanted to develop a unidirectional flushing program. They wanted to be able to use less water, less time, and less resources to accomplish their flushing program. So one of their issues was trying to figure out how to set up a program so they could flow all their hydrants once or twice a year and flush the system only as needed to achieve their quality goals. So, you know, which hydrants were really necessary to achieve the goals they wanted. So they had to start with inventorying all their hydrants. Then they tested all the hydrants, and they did find 2 that didn't have adequate flow. They planned replacements for those particular hydrants. They now have raw data on all the flushing of the hydrants, what flow rates and all that sort of thing. And they were able to use that information to develop a plan for how they were going to flush the system going forward. So it's really going to save them a lot of time and effort now that they know so much more about their hydrants, and they've been able to make sure that they're all working correctly. Another utility looked at their chemical feed pumps. These are the pumps feeding chlorine into their system. They were having a lot of failures in the tubing, the diaphragms, cracked pumps that all occurred. And when they had these kinds of failures, they were having experiences with expensive cleanup and potential health and safety concerns, because chlorine is potentially hazardous when it's in its pure form as you're pumping it into the system. They wanted to better predict the failures rather than waiting until something bad happened and now they have a cleanup they have to deal with. So they started a data collection program on their chemical feed pumps using runtime so that they could look at what point do they want to take action, at how many hours into the runtime do they want to do maintenance activities or replacement activities. And they also developed some detailed pump curves that would help them better run their system and figure out what settings to use to get the results that they would like. So all of those examples are just, it's a smattering. We actually had several others, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the different kinds of things that you can do with asset management. And every one of those utilities knows more about its system now than it did before. Every one of them found wins, by doing asset management. They had some benefits and some victories out of just knowing more about their system, making repairs where things didn't work. So even breaking down asset management to just one small part of your system can provide you benefits. Now, several of them have actually taken up the offer from Vermont to do asset management activities, and they've applied for funding and are continuing the program beyond the initial activities that they did. So the training approach, what you can expect if you come to the training, we'll be doing a performance-based training. This came from the AWOP program, so the Area-Wide Optimization Program. If any of you have ever participated in that, this is kind of a takeoff of that. And it's really based at showing trainees how to apply learning to their utilities. So what you learn in class can be applied to what you're doing in your job. We do a lot of group activities and a lot of peer-to-peer interaction and learning. And then it can build a network of support. So you'll have your peers as people that you can talk to. You'll get to know them through the training, and you can talk to them about issues that you might be having. So it'll give you support even past the training. Each of the meetings will have a presentation on a particular area of asset management. Since we have 4 meetings and 5 core concepts, we will actually cover 2 of the concepts in one meeting. But in general, each one of those core concepts will be a particular meeting, and we'll really dig in depth to, asset inventory, level of service, criticality, etc. There'll be a group activity at each meeting where you'll get in a small group and work through an activity. And then we'll have a discussion of an applied activity that you will do at your own facility, taking what we've discussed in class and kind of applying it. And it will be applied to the individual activity that you pick. And then at the next meeting, you'll actually make a presentation, and it can be as formal or informal as you want. There's no requirements for how that presentation has to be done, but it will describe what you did at your facility. You can bring up any issues or questions that you had. You can, excuse me, you can share with your peers. You can ask questions of how others did things. They will share information with you. So it's really all about sharing, how did this work, what challenges you had, and you'll get a chance to kind of learn from each other's experiences. So what do we ask from the participants? We ask that somebody from your utility attend all the meetings. It's best if at least one of the same people attend all the meetings, but you may wish to bring individuals to particular meetings. So say when we're talking about the long-term funding, you may want a financial person, or if we're talking about criticality, maybe you want to bring, an operator. But it's best if it's somebody in the management decision-making end of things attends, and it's best if at least one of the same people attend all the meetings. A willingness to do the asset management applied activities, because that's really where you'll get the benefits. That's where you'll learn about your system, and you'll start to see how asset management can help you solve problems that you're having. And being willing to present your asset management applied activity at the next meeting, and it's not a scary thing at all. You're just in front of your peers, and again, it doesn't have to be any specific kind of presentation. You're not asked to do PowerPoint or anything like that, but just to stand up and talk about what you did, any challenges you experienced, successes you had, etc. You just need to keep an open mind and have a willingness to learn, and you'll get a lot out of the classes. Before the first class, we'll ask you to complete what we call the Asset Management IQ. It's an online tool, and we'll send out the link. If you haven't received it already, we'll make sure you get the link to the Asset Management IQ. It's 30 questions. It generally takes a utility maybe 20 minutes to 30 minutes to complete. You just read each question and be as honest as you can about where you think you are in your asset management practice, because that will be a way to see what your starting point is. It will give you a baseline from which you can then go forward and measure progress over time. So if you do it again a year from now, you'll be able to see how your scores have improved, what things are better, and then give you another chance to say, well, now where do I want to focus my time for the next 6 months, year, etc. So we'll ask you to bring that to class. You can print it out. If you go online and do the online version, you will have the opportunity to print a PDF and you can bring it. If you don't like the online version, you will see here on the website there's a blue underline. You can actually click on that and print out the Asset Management IQ and do it on paper. So whichever way you like is fine, but either bring the printed copy from the internet or the paper version that you filled out to the first class, because we'll talk about it at our first meeting. So what we'll ask you to do for the Asset Management Applied activities is similar to what I talked about with the examples for the other systems. We'll ask you to focus in on what is one of your biggest issues or concerns. What do you hope to achieve with doing the asset management through the class? So it could be examples like what we talked about before, hydrants, meters, valves. It could be a pump station. It could be a tank. It could be a particular portion of your pipe. We try to keep it fairly narrow so that you're not doing all of the piping in your system, because that could feel really overwhelming to try to take that on in a relatively short period of time. But if you keep it nice and focused, we didn't really see that the utilities who participated last time had trouble getting it completed before the next class, because we kept it very focused and tried to keep it small enough that it was manageable for you to do the activity from one class to the next. So we'll have you talk about that. You do not have to be completely ready before the first class, but just think about it before you come to class. And then we'll take some time in that first class to really talk about issues you're having and focus on the issue you would like to carry forward through your asset management applied activities. So in summary, just some thoughts that I like to leave people with in terms of asset management is it's better to walk on the right road than run on the wrong one. So if it takes you a while to get your asset management program in place, if you start by doing your valves this year and maybe next year you're doing pumps and the next year you're doing wells, it's okay, because you're still moving forward in the direction you want to move, and you're building your system, managing your system in a better way. So even if it takes you a while to get kind of to a better place, that's okay, as long as you're going sort of in a good direction, you're using the thought process. It's really okay if it takes a little while to get there. And another thought I really like is don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can do. So everybody has restrictions. They may be financial. They may be a boss who doesn't completely agree with what you're trying to do. They may be a customer base that's not supportive. There's all kinds of restrictions. But even within those restrictions, there's a lot you can do anyway. So you don't need a lot of upper management support to figure out which direction your valves are turning, for example. You can go out, do that, paint the valve cans, and make your life easier. So there are things you can still do. Even if you can't do everything you want, you can still do some things. So don't ever be worried that if I can't go all the way and do everything I want, it's not worth doing, because it is. It's still worth doing, even if there are some restrictions on exactly how far you can go. So at this point, we'll we'll see if we have any questions, and we're happy to answer any questions. If you haven't had a chance to type in your questions or your comments or concerns, please do so now, and we're happy to answer anything that comes in. And then I will also put up contact information for myself. I think you probably already have Jim and Allison's contact information. If you have any questions about the training, feel free to contact Jim, Allison, or myself with any questions after the webinar. Do we have any questions?
We do not.
Looks like we don't have any questions right now. Jim or Allison, is there anything you want to add about the training or resources available or anything that we didn't cover thus far?
I don't think so. I think you did a pretty good job covering what's going on. Certainly people are free to contact us. We'll be available too between the individual workshop classes to help people as well. Maybe Heather, you could talk a little bit about some of the tools, if you are comfortable doing that at this point, that you plan to develop in the near future.
Okay. What we've been working on now is we know that sometimes it's difficult in the scheme of things, like I talked about before. You have so many competing activities that you have to do and regulations you have to meet and demands as you're putting out your fires at your utilities with broken pipes and whatever. So we're trying to develop some more tools to help you get where you need to go. So for example, we are working on a level of service tool that will help communities by outlining, here's, say, I can't remember exactly how many are on there, somewhere around 10 to 12 level of service goals that are kind of generic that just about any utility could adopt, and they cover the basic things that a customer would want out of a utility. And so we're trying to streamline the process somewhat to help utilities. We're also working on some operation and maintenance tools, some simplified tools for developing a simple O&M plan for a small water utility. If you're a much larger utility, say in the more 5 to 10,000 range, it might be simpler than you want, but for the smaller systems, it'll probably cover the basics of the operation and maintenance activities that you want to do at your facility. So what we're trying to do is maybe bridge the gap a little bit between where you're starting out now and where you want to get. And you may ultimately choose, a year or two from now or 3 or 4 years from now to pick, more sophisticated tools to use, but at least this will get you started, because the most important part of asset management is really the thought process, and anything else is just a tool to help you think. So, as we develop an operation and maintenance plan, it's a tool to help you store what maintenance activities you want to do. But you'll start thinking about, well, what kind of equipment do I have? What kind of routine maintenance do I want to do? And this tool will help you kind of think about that a little bit easier, give you some guidance. So we will, through the course, we will be giving you some, as many as we can, tools to help you make it easier. And then you'll actually learn a lot from your peers. We saw a lot of that going on last time we did training in Montpelier and Rutland. And we had several systems there who were able to share, hey, this is the tool that I use to locate my hydrants. And literally would talk to each other about, here's how the tool worked, here's where you would get it from. You can either use this free version or this version that you pay a little bit of money for. If you use the free version, this is the pros and cons. If you spend a little money, this is what happens. And so we literally had utilities helping each other out with ideas of, how did you do this inventory, or what did you do when your hydrants were covered by bushes? How did you handle that process? And it was also a learning opportunity that maybe if you were doing meters, you were learning something about hydrants or tanks or valves because everybody was doing a different thing. So it gave you a much more comprehensive view of asset management because you were seeing the pieces at each utility. So utilities were getting ideas from each other that they could take back to their utilities and use either then or in the future when they were ready to address some other asset class like valves or hydrants. So it's a really good opportunity to learn, and it's all about how to make your life better as an operator or a manager or elected leader. at a utility because it is a tough job. It's a very tough job to run a utility, and so anything we can do to make your job better is really what we're trying to do. And I see asset management as that kind of tool. It's a way to make your life easier. It's not something being imposed on you just because it's something that will make your life better, and I've seen the benefits. That's why I'm so passionate about asset management, is I see systems improving. You know, just by even doing little bits of asset management, they can make some major improvements. So I encourage you to really take advantage of this opportunity. Vermont is really being generous with the funding for asset management. Not every state has that. So it's a really good opportunity to learn and do some things on your own, and then have the opportunity to get funding to do some additional things that you want to do at your facility. Looks like we still don't have any questions, so I think we'll stop there. And I thank everybody for participating today. We will record the webinar, so if there's anybody that you would like to have hear the message, either all or part of the webinar, feel free to download it. We'll get the link out to everybody, and you can watch all or part of the webinar again. You can share it with others. And we hope to see all of you in August for the first class.